Welcome to the CISO Perspectives interview series. It's part of the CISO Street. I'm Lorene Smith, and I'm the Global Vice President of Strategic Alliances. And I'm happy to be here with my guest, Brian Fricke, who is the Chief Information Security Officer at City National Bank. And we're here virtually, of course, given the situation with the pandemic. So welcome, Brian. So happy to have you here.
Thank you. Good to be here.
So we're going to go through for about 45 minutes or so. We're just going to, talk about your background in cybersecurity and other things about what you're doing with your career. And so we'll just start out if you could do an introduction of yourself and tell the audience a little bit about City National Bank for those who may not know about this particular bank.
Sure. So thank you again. City National Bank is almost a $70 billion bank based in Los Angeles with offices in California to New York to Miami and Nashville and others in between. Our client base is typically entrepreneurs and business owners. We also have a large portion of wealth management clients, a lot from the entertainment industry with high touch needs. And so that's generally how I would characterize the organization. I don't know. I think part of the question is really about kind of how did I begin into this industry? And so
yeah, tell me about how you got your start in cybersecurity, and then I'm definitely curious. We'll go into the pandemic and how that's impacting people, and I'm really curious how that is impacting these individuals that need a lot of high touch. So it's somewhat limited now, but tell us how you got your start in cybersecurity and how you got into your career or your position right now at City National Bank.
Yeah, so really it all goes back to high school for me. I was always tinkering with computers. A friend of the family kind of showed me some stuff early on, and I ended up building my own computers and playing with BBS, like billboards and other kind of early internet outreach and activity, AOL and whatnot. But I very quickly out of high school, I joined the Marine Corps. I was active duty Marines for 5 years. I was an aviation electrician working on helicopters, so still in a technical field. Served a year in Japan and a year in Iraq. And toward the end of my career, I transitioned to doing a lot more of the IT administrative type work for the squadron. One of which is actually a response to blaster worm, which is an early worm that really did cripple a lot of DoD systems and commercial systems. But back then it was a simple fix, right? You just get a CD, you clean it, and then you patch it, and you're good to go. And that made me appear to have know a vast amount of knowledge that nobody else knew. So I was quite the hero locally for a little while. But after that 5 years, I was able to transition pretty easily into federal government service. So having the IT background, and I guess you could say cybersecurity, although it wasn't a domain of warfare then, and my clearance, ended up transitioning into federal government work, working at the DoD and other agencies, mostly in Washington, D.C. I kept pressing on different certifications and educational opportunities. There was an opportunity that came along where the cyber branch manager, so cyber had just become a domain of warfare, it was about 2013, and the cyber branch manager was called up to active duty. He was a reservist, and I was chosen to fill that role. I also was simultaneously pursuing my executive MBA through the George Washington University in Washington, D.C. And when that was all wrapping up, somebody from my network reached out to me to transition kind of into the financial sector as their CISO of an $8 billion bank, very small bank. And, so preparation, that positive work ethic and attitude, it met opportunity, right? And through the strength of my network, that's kind of how I ended up on this path and where I am today.
Very good. I know a lot of the CISOs that I talk to have a military background. I definitely see a theme there. So it must have, like, this cybersecurity, and like you said, cybersecurity didn't really become a thing until not too recently. And so it's just interesting to see that path.
Yeah. It was IT security, and then it became a domain of warfare, and lots of funding and doctrine were applied, and the discipline began to shape around it. The National Institute of Standards and Technology started to create various control standards. The DoD created all the TTPs, tactics and techniques and procedures for actually engaging in defensive and offensive activity around that. So
yeah, interesting. So I know we've talked about this before, but and you were on a panel that we did recently at the FutureCon event, and so we talked about the pandemic and how it's impacting, every business, every person around the world, basically. But tell me how things are right now in LA, and what's happening at the bank, and how you're, kind of addressing security needs, but also more on a personal level, like how are the customers dealing with the pandemic, and how is business still busy at the banks?
Yes, definitely. It really comes down to, I think initially it was this awareness, right? That we are in a new kind of operating environment. The benefit is a lot of people already were remote working, at least part-time or ad hoc. And so a lot of the processes, but a lot of the processes that had not caught up, a lot of back office processes continued to rely on paper signature, wet signatures on paper, or certain back office processes like that. So I think that's one of the bigger transitions, is digitizing the back office to meet the demands of the business, right? And, now the business is virtualized, right? In ways that we've always known we were headed, but now even your staff are in that same situation. You mentioned, high touch, kind of activity around, serving our clients well. We have to then come up with better ways to do so, right? Better ways to communicate, better ways to engage. So electronic signatures, which should be a foregone conclusion, but often, again, no matter which organization you're in or what company, you don't necessarily pop the hood and start re-engineering things just because maybe a piece of technology comes along, like e-sign. And so that really is a catalyst. A lot of this pandemic is a catalyst across the country in many different ways. But specifically when it comes to the way we do business and just, the changes we have to make, everyone's being mindful and trying to do their best to keep up with the demands of our clients. When you think about the capacity to serve our colleagues and our employees who are needing to work from home, we had to increase our bandwidth, we had to increase our monitoring capabilities. When you think about data loss prevention type activity, all of that's really, comes into play as your workforce begins to be more of a remote workforce.
Right.
That's probably the biggest changes I've seen.
Yeah, I think just with stressful situations, this pandemic, when we've had economic crashes before, I think out the silver lining of it all, we really see some new innovation, and like you said, it's across the board, and I think it's at all levels. I mean, you mentioned e-signature. I am moving to New York in a couple of weeks, and I am downsizing a lot of those things. I'm like, do I really need a printer?
Yeah.
And I ended up buying a very small printer, and I got a full version of PDF, so I can just do signature there, so I don't need it anymore. And that's not really innovation, but it's something that's forced me to do something I've been wanting to do.
Right.
And then you take that on the scale of big business. I think people were immediately forced into doing something they'd been talking about doing a very long time. And even like we talked about on the panel before, that BCP and DR, were these plans were intended to be in place for certain disasters affecting certain offices, not everybody all at the same time. And people have really had to adjust.
And the objective is often to return to normal operations, right? So in any of those, whether it be whether it be a disaster recovery type scenario, the point is returning to normal operations, and that's not the point in this scenario.
Right.
Again, we've had to.
I don't know that we're ever going to go back to what we thought as normal, so.
Redefining what normal means for organizations. I think just recently, I think Siemens issued that they're going to be doing 100% remote work for all employees. So think about how that affects the organization, right? They can now shift resources from buildings, right? Building physical security and all of the different facilities they have to manage. That's just one huge cost savings / transition of cost, right, into other maybe technological means to keep their workforce effective. So.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, we don't even want to talk about what the commercial real estate what's going to happen to commercial real estate. I think that industry is really going to need to innovate and decide and figure out different ways to use their commercial real estate.
That's right. You figure out, or you kind of calculate that there is already a housing shortage, right, across the nation. Will all of these large commercial buildings be converted into some sort of, hybrid office and living spaces?
Right. Right, exactly. Because I mean, our office, even though I knew it was coming, we just announced about 2 weeks ago that our offices are going to be closed until at least minimum January 2021. And I was like, wow, I don't know, hearing that. And that's happening all across the board. So I think that the live work situation is going to be a big thing. I think it was, maybe 10, 15 years ago. And now I think it's going to become a thing again.
It's a shifting emphasis in, I used to have all hands meetings on a pretty frequent basis. Some do it quarterly, some do it monthly. Now every Friday morning I host a 30-minute, coffee with the CISO, and I talk about what's happening in the organization. We go around the room, we go around the horn and get people, talk about the good things that are happening and all the positive work that's been going on. And, that you have to learn new ways of engaging with your teams. Even my staff have to start creating new and better ways of managing the workload because they're not meeting physically, right? Having face-to-face meetings, I think is still important to read the room, to read people's, emotion, right? I forget the ratio, but a large percentage is about body language, right? So when we communicate, and I think that's important to continue to keep an eye on. Measuring people's productivity is a huge part of it, but even still, I mean, those same ways you were measuring it before should still be intact, right? You have goals and objectives. Are they meeting the goals and objectives? Great. Really, though, it's what are the tools they're using to now achieve them now that they're out of the office?
Right. And I think that's a big task now, not only keeping people in the enterprise secure, but it's keeping people productive. I mean, yeah, so that's leads into a question about securing the organization, especially in this pandemic, especially when everybody's work from home. It's much more challenging to do that because of, securing home networks is not an easy thing to do, providing enough bandwidth when they are on the internal system. So how do you manage that with trying to keep everything secure, but keeping people, the business running at the speed of business? How do you handle that, or how do you address that?
I think most of your CIOs and your CISOs are always going to be keen on the needs of the business and that trade-off between the control, what we would call technically a control requirement, right? Policies, standards, technical controls that we've implemented to be able to monitor, detect, respond to various activity. I don't think that's changed. I think it may be changing in the sense that the velocity increases, right? We have to skate where the puck is headed, kind of thing. But we should be used to that as a technology provider in any organization. It's always about what are the technical requirements, what are the non-technical requirements from the business, and let's make sure that we can meet their needs. And ultimately, especially in the financial sector, it's really a balance of risk, right? Are you measuring the risk? Are you presenting that risk to the organization, to the business? Are they accepting that risk and making informed decisions about the direction that they're headed? That's really our goal. A chief information security officer is not there to accept risk or hide risk, right? We're there to appropriately manage it, measure it, and report it so that we can all be on the same page organizationally for our technology risk and where that lies.
Yeah, that's a great new segue into the next question, which is really around getting a seat at the table with the executives. And oftentimes I heard that prior to the pandemic, and I've talked to a lot of CISOs over the last few years, that it's challenging to get the executives to not necessarily take things seriously, but really listen the way they should listen. And what I heard was after the pandemic hit, all of a sudden the CISO was the leader, and the executive team was turned toward the CISO to say, help us with this. How are we going to handle this work from home? How are we going to keep the company secure? And I really think that I'm hearing a shift in this. And so I'm curious what your thoughts are around that.
Yeah, I think often, of course, the CIO would be the one to say, okay, we're going to work from home, but then it always goes back to, are we doing this safely, right? It's always kind of the pivot, no matter what the thing is or the great idea is, we're going to go to the cloud, right? Okay, well, then they look at the CISO or, the security team and go, how do we do that right? How do we do that safely? And that's good. It's good that they think in those terms. When you say having a seat at the executive table, right? That's really about our own ability to communicate on a routine basis. And even I still struggle with this, is how do we craft the message, deliver it in a routine and consistent way that's understandable, building that trust, building that consistency. And that's a huge part of our job as a CISO, is to proactively engage at that level. Early on, I think, IT, security it was always no's. I think people have heard that before. Don't be the CISO of no kind of thing.
Right.
And that's not the answer, right? The answer is yes, but, right? Or, we want to get you there safely, always. It may have cost, and that's fine. And that's our job, is to identify what those costs are, what those controls should be, what the risk is of doing it or not doing it, or doing it halfway if there's a middle ground. That's always should be, in my opinion, the nature of the conversation. Same thing with budget cuts, right? Now we're probably seeing a lot of companies start to tighten their belts. So as an information security team, it's our job to show, okay, you want to take 2% of the budget or 5% or not hire additional people. Here's where that affects the business information security risk profile, not how it affects the InfoSec team, right? So
Right.
Again, the nature of the conversation should always come back to the risk to the organization.
Yeah, and presenting that. It's funny that you say the yes and, well, I interviewed somebody recently, actually did a webinar, and his thing was, you need to be a yes and, not a no but person.
Yeah.
And it's exactly what you're saying. So
100%.
yeah, I think that it's really a critical thing, is to be able to communicate properly, and also establish relationships with the business leaders, especially when you start a new job. And I think for CISOs that, or people that are looking to get into cybersecurity, who are going to watch and listen to this replay on the interview, I think that's an important thing. And maybe you can comment on that too, is, building relationships when you first start a new job as a CISO. Like, what do you do the first 30, 60, 90 days? And I've often heard that, establishing relationships with the business leaders is important.
Very much so. And I'm at a bit of a disadvantage. I've been at this organization now about 9 months. And, as I intended to engage with them and meet with them, all of the different key stakeholders, the pandemic hit. We have, in every organization, you have different regulatory kind of pressures and priorities. You have different audit pressures and priorities.
Right.
And all of that kind of, is coming to a head on top of a pandemic. So it ended up putting a lot of the relationship building kind of to the side, which again, that's for me to manage, but I recognize that as a current deficiency, but in prior organizations, very critical. And in fact, even if you can't engage with the lines of business immediately, you still need to engage with certain partners, like your audit partner, risk partners, even your regulators. They should be part of your stakeholder profile, right? When you think of how you're crafting your information security program. But the needs of the business, the friction points, right? When you can start to alleviate some of that friction, every policy basically is on the table when you take over. So when they say, hey, we aren't allowed to print from home, for instance, right? It's like, well, that's not true. You can print from home, but you need to make sure that you have X, Y, and Z, controls in place. And if you do that, you can do so, and we'll document that you're doing it in that way, and everything's good. So you do find a lot of that when you take over in a new role like this, is you need to relook at all of your policies and standards, right? And some things are unwritten, and they just go, well, InfoSec said blah, blah, blah. Well, that may not be the case, right? Like, you just make sure that everybody knows that the new sheriff in town, new approaches being taken, and again, build those relationships and understand what they're trying to achieve and how you and your program, the InfoSec program, can help achieve those.
And so how do you look at the CISO role? Like, before, like you said, you've been in this field for a very long time, and the CISO role really wasn't created, not too long ago it was created. And where do you see that role evolving? And I think maybe now with the pandemic in place, it might be a different answer than 4 months ago or 5 months ago if I'd asked you this. But where do you see the CISO role going in the next 5 years?
So there's a school of thought around, perhaps your chief technology officer should report to your CISO, right? That's been discussed, or your CIO would report to your CISO. And that really just is changing the priority of having security be top of mind, and everything that's done from an operational perspective would then make sure there's no conflict of interest with security, because that often is a problem where you have a chief information officer, maybe ignoring vulnerability management, right, or ignoring certain risk requirements or control requirements in favor of operational budgets and things like that. That conflict of interest is really typically a catalyst for making the CISO report elsewhere to your chief legal counsel or your chief risk officer or even the CEO. And so it really is cultural, right? Every organization is going to have a different tolerance for that. The larger organizations, I don't think you'll see that pivot occur as quickly. Your more tech-forward companies may do something like that. But it's always going to be that balance of roles and of duties, and so I could see that occurring. You may end up seeing. It's also, I think organizations are becoming more understand the domain a little better. So having your CEO, if they're tech savvy enough, they may want a CIO and a CISO reporting to them, so there is no conflict, right? Others, you know, a CIO may be very aware of the need of security, and then every plan they make, every strategy they develop, every budget request that goes through, security is top of mind, and there's a chief to chief partnership, and so it's fine to remain under the CIO. So very much cultural and organizational in nature.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I hadn't heard about the CISO report, or the CIO reporting to the CISO. That's an interesting twist. But I agree with you, like the partnership aspect of partners in security, not partners in crime, but partners in security, I think is really important. So that's a good point. So what surprised you most in your career? And just, you know, you've had a very long career, especially being from in military and all the way to the bank here. But what has surprised you most in your career?
I think that and maybe it's just me, but I feel like we often will underestimate the capabilities of our own staff and the connivingness of our own employees trying to, circumvent controls in our own staff, their capacity to implement and think creatively to deploy new controls. So I think we have to, never underestimate the people that you're working with and engaging with. Understanding their capabilities and their needs are going to be always critical to that. The more complex and misunderstood a control is, the more likely that your employee is going to try to go around it, right? And if you haven't thought of the situation from their perspective, that's what penetration testing is all about, and security assessments are all about, is looking at it end to end from another point of view. But I think that's been. I think every time I turn around, there's somebody who's surprising me in a good way, typically. But sometimes you recognize that they're doing it in a bad way, right? So that's one of the bigger ones. I think the pace of technology change is also really fascinating. There's just such huge leaps and bounds in different spaces. Specifically, when we talk about artificial intelligence and machine learning, which have been very buzzy, wordy, but those are being now that discipline and the data scientists that they work with are being deployed more purposefully in organizations. You start to see the fruits coming from applying those tools to current problems, right? Customer service increases in certain areas because they might have applied a new model, fraud detection, incident prevention and response type activity. Just so many different areas across the board, from the client-facing side to the back-end cybersecurity operational side. And that's really fascinating. I love seeing the changes that are coming, and we have to adapt our programs and try to figure out how do we continue to incorporate this cutting edge technology. Otherwise, the program that you built a few years ago with the tools you selected will become out of date pretty quickly.
Yeah, that's really true. I mean, it's the same every field, especially now. I think we have to be really adaptable to addressing the situation with the pandemic, and it'll be interesting to see what's going to happen in the next 5 years. Hopefully we get out of the pandemic, probably next year sometime, but it'll be interesting to see how our behavior will change over time. So just focusing on your career, and again, with the perspective of helping CISOs or helping people who are interested in getting into cybersecurity, what has helped you most advance in your career?
If you look at my path, everyone's path is going to be different, but being willing to move, right? Being able to make that change, which I think actually will become easier now that most people are remotely working, right? I think that there won't be as big of a requirement to move. But one thing you can't do is expect to be paid more and given more duties and responsibilities by just doing the same work you've been doing, right? I know it sounds a little harsh because people are like, I do great work at what I do. Well, then great, but you'll probably keep doing that same work and not doing anything else unless you challenge yourself, unless you ask for that next project, unless you're seeking out new knowledge in different domains, right? New certifications that show that you have a certain fundamental mastery of a particular domain. you know, those are all going to be part of the journey. I think I mentioned early on about, you know, preparation, right? It meets opportunity. The preparation part, you have 100% control over, maybe 99% control over your own preparation in the field, right? So again, your knowledge base, your expertise. Is information security a hobby to you? Are you are you building labs, and are you trying to break you know, machines and tinker, or is it just something you punch in and punch out of 9 to 5, right? Those are going to be indicators of your own motivation of whether you think you're going to continue down that path, or stay where you're at. So those are really important to consider. Um, you know, the strength of your network is probably another huge portion of that equation. When you think about, you know, it's not so much who you know, it's who thinks of you in the time of an opportunity, right? So again, my early example, you know, somebody was called up to active duty, so I was thought of to take that role. Shortly after, somebody in my network reached out to take a role to be their chief information security officer, right? They thought of me and reached out to me. Even through the several CISO roles I've been in. Again, it's been through that network. So the strength of your network is important. Contribute to the industry, right? Be a thought leader, write articles, put information out there, put your opinion out there, and not stir it up, and not I see sometimes where people just, they post and comments on every little thing they can, and they're doing the social media crunch, which is
Right.
probably great for them. But again, when you're a practitioner, when you're doing the work and you're in the trenches, you'll form your own opinions on things, and people want to hear those. So
Right. I think that's why these panels are so popular, the security panels that I've been moderating, because people are interested in hearing about that. And you're right. I totally agree with you. The network, building your network and doing the work, and being thought of when the opportunity comes up. That's so true. That's a really good point.
yeah.
So who do you turn to for advice? Do you have a group of like a mentor, or do you have a group of fellow CISOs that you regularly meet with, or get a beer with? What's your
Yeah.
way of getting advice?
Back to your network, right? So I have some trusted colleagues that I know at any point I can text them, I can talk to them, I can cry on their shoulder about woe is me and all the travesties of the role, no matter where I'm at, and they're there to help and support. That's what's great about our industry. There's not a lot of looking down on people because they're asking for knowledge or asking for opinions, right? Somebody reached out to me the other day and asked a very similar type question on career pathing, and they wanted to transition into InfoSec. And so I took the time and I told them, here's what I think you should do. Look in these domains, figure out where within the industry do you want to be. When you think about the industry at large, there's kind of this major assurance body of work of governance, risk, compliance, risk assessors, auditors, on the assurance side of the equation. And then you look on the cybersecurity operations, that more technical side, where they're deploying, the tools and operating those tools. They're doing defensive and offensive type activity. So are you extremely technical? If you want to get into that space, there's a different path. If you want to be more of an IT risk assessor or auditor, you can have a very strong and valued career on the assurance side of the house. So just understanding where your strengths are personally and what your path is going to be, all that comes into play.
Yeah, I heard a CISO tell me that when you're preparing for a job interview is to decide what kind of CISO you want to be, what kind of security professional do you want to be, and really embrace that, because then you go into it with a clear confidence that, this is the area you want, and it really helps kind of differentiate and distinguish you for a particular role.
And I'll say, in all cases, you need to be able to talk the business talk, right? So the only reason I got my MBA is because I knew that was a gap, a soft spot for myself. I knew I didn't have the business acumen. I couldn't talk the same talk and the terminologies and engage with lines of business at their level, or at least be prepared to have the same, using the same lexicon of terms with them. And it's all different. And an MBA doesn't make you a master of business in the purest sense, but it does give you a foundation and a common dictionary from which we all can then have conversations about. So that's another thing, being able to translate the ones and zeros into dollars and cents or into risk. Being that translator is a key function for any CISO.
Right. That's interesting. So I have a daughter who just graduated. Well, she graduated last year in mechanical engineering, and she's been trying to find a job. And she finally an opportunity landed on her lap last week. And so she was telling me, Mom, I am nervous about this. And I said, well, what are they asking for? And they said, well, they want somebody who can take these complex mechanical engineering projects we're working on and explain them to the business people that they're working with,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
that they can understand.
right.
And I said, oh, well, she goes, I can do that. I said, yeah, I think it's really important. It's an important part of the job.
Critical.
So especially if you want to make business relationships with the business leaders in your organization, I think it's really important
Right.
to do that. Yeah.
Right.
So what do you like to do when you're not in CISO mode? Have any hobbies, interesting hobbies?
If when you get the opportunity to downshift, I like to just go to the beach and not and disconnect. Right, that's my ideal getaway. Being able to that's why being in LA is so great. Um,
You live close to the beach?
I wish I was closer. But I'm probably only about a half an hour, so I
Okay.
can't complain. I can't complain at all. But that for me, that is, I do like that. I used to be a video gamer, but again, there's no time for that these days. And that was always nice. And now that, the same environment where we're working is also.
Exactly. There's no break. I mean, you just be moving from one side of the couch to the other, work versus video gaming. So
Really, being able to lean on just exercising, taking a run, doing some sort of physical activity every day. I think that's really important for stress release, no matter what role that you're in.
right.
Having that routine of deep, getting that stress out, and so exercise and finding some place to be tranquil, right? I think are both really key to decompressing from this kind of work.
Yeah, I think now too, especially with the pandemic, I personally, because I'm a pretty hard charging person too, got a lot of energy, trying to problem solver. And and I've been on a lot of calls with CISOs day in and day out. And then, I don't know, towards the end of month 3 in the pandemic, I definitely hit a wall. And then I started hearing others talk about it. And then I was interviewing and moderating panels with CISOs, and they were talking about it as well. And then the whole thing about people, their employees, and how do they secure them in their home, and this like whole mental wellness is going to be, your mental health and wellness is going to be an important part of this going forward. And
That's also really key. I want to say, our employee assistance program is really great, and I made sure to express that to our staff. We are in very high stress work. Just technology in general, frankly, just being alive in this day and age, right? It's very high stress, especially being in the information security space. So, practicing mindfulness, taking an opportunity to step back from the stressors. I think that's really important for people to start to understand as a practice, right? It's one thing to go to the gym and blow off steam. It's another just to
right.
take a breath, right?
Yes.
Calm that chatterbox down, and then reform and purposefully form your next thoughts and the approaches you're going to take for the day.
Yeah, I think we're going to have to come up with ways with our teams to tell them to take these breaks. And it's interesting when you said that, breath. I don't watch TV very often, but every once in a while, if I'm cooking dinner, I'll have the TV on, and I can't see it where I cook, but I hear it. And all of a sudden, it'd be the little chatter of the news or whatever, and then there'd be some silent music, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's that Calm app that just plays like, and it says 30 seconds to calm or breathe. And it literally reminds me, I'm like, oh yeah, I got to do that.
Yeah.
So it's just, and I've been hearing more and more that we're needing to remind our teams to take breaks. I had another CISO tell me that she requires at least once a week the people that she has meetings with to go outside and do their meetings from outside, walking, probably with a mask on now, but but I really embrace it, because our CEO said that the mandate was we all had to be on camera, because he wanted to make sure that we were all productive. And this was at the beginning of the pandemic. And I was like, okay, I get it. But now the results are in, and we are way more productive than we were before, but the burnout's happening. So it's like, I just need to take that break to be outside.
Yeah. Especially like people's lunches are just totally overwritten by meetings now, because people just assume you're there and you can have a quick snack at the fridge and you're done.
Right.
You don't step out and go get it, or you have it delivered. It's a real shift in the culture and the way that we work. And so we have to be mindful of not burning ourselves out, even more than just burning it out at a particular job, burning out as a person with your having family time, all that is really critical for a whole life, right? A holistic life.
Right.
They
Right.
don't, well,
So yeah, I mean, this wraps up what we're doing in the interview, but I have a couple questions that are off topic. So and I'm from LA and I grew up at the beach, and I definitely know, I lived in Redondo Beach, Manhattan Beach. And I know my kind of calming, happy spot is at the beach and hearing the waves crash, and also eating great food along the beach. But I'm just curious, I haven't been in LA in a long time, but and now it's mostly takeout that you have to do. I don't think your restaurants are open yet, but
right.
what's one of your favorite restaurants in LA?
Javier's, which I think is in Century City.
Yeah.
I'm actually kind of in the West Hollywood area,
Okay.
but there's such good food everywhere. There's various delivery services where it's kind of the pre-mades, goes in the fridge, and
Right.
then in the evening you just pop in the oven,
Yep.
and it comes out and it's just fantastic without all the prep and cleanup and all and that's extra time you can bring back to you in your day and your family. Those plus when you can go to like In Cafe. I mean, In Cafe is another local kind of vegan, vegetarian friendly place that they create very tasty meals. So there's just so many options, Postmates,
Yeah,
etc.
that's good. I know Javier's quite well. So there's
Yeah,
one in Newport Beach. So
very nice.
I've been there often.
My
Uh,
I think it's my 19-year anniversary is in a couple days, and I think we're gonna try to get in at maybe the Del Frisco nearby it. But there's some nice restaurants right there in Crystal
that's
City.
good.
Century
Yeah.
City.
I know I like Chiconi's, which is in West Hollywood area there.
Yeah.
So that's good. So what if you could think back on your career, what's the funniest security issue that you've had to deal with?
Funniest security issue.
Yeah. I mean, security isn't usually funny, but just any experience you've had that's been comical that you had to take a laugh at.
I think most all of the situations that I think of, and it's probably more on the IT support side, probably not so much a security thing, but it ends up being the user understanding of technology, right? How it works and how they can do certain things. And when you're on the phone, right, you can't see or do or help them click the things. This was years ago. Nowadays, it's very easy. I can take over your computer and move your mouse and look and see and do. I was trying to describe the power button to a lawyer who had just joined us and at the organization, and I was trying to describe the little symbol of the U with the open and the close.
Right.
And it probably took 30 minutes for her to find the power button to her monitor, because I couldn't find anything wrong with the computer, but it turned out it was the monitor that was off. So it did remind me that not everybody, it was years ago, but not everybody understands the basic knowledge, like where an information security or IT practitioner comes from. When you're working with your user base or clients or whomever, you've really got to go down to a level and don't assume that they know a whole lot. So
Right.
not a super hilarious story, but I know that I just always trying to describe the on button. It was just
Right.
so wild.
It goes back to the basics, and where you are light years ahead of the basics. Most people aren't, so
Yeah,
that's important.
I take it for granted.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, thank you so much. This wraps up our interview of the CISO Perspective interview, and I really enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much, and we'll be in touch.
Anytime. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brian. Bye.